What's going on, everyone? Darkside Phil here, and welcome to another edition of the Hateful Truth video game review series, where you can get maximum truth and minimum bullshit. That's right, I cut through all the nonsense, the red tape, the mainstream media hype, and I tell you like it is, exactly what my thoughts and honest feelings were about the game when I played it during my own personal playthrough. And today we're going to talk about a game 2.5 years in the making. When the original game had come out way back in 2010, a lot of people kind of were on the fence. They didn't know exactly how to accept it or how to take it. It was because it was a really interesting thing. It was taking the open world RPG exploration, platforming, and item finding gameplay of a game similar to, say, Zelda or Legacy of Kain, and combining it with the more gory, adult-oriented themes of recent combat games like God of War, and so on and so forth. Now, this game, of course, was Darksiders, and at the time, a lot of people just didn't understand it. They skipped it. A lot of people just skipped it. They didn't know what it was. They didn't know if this was going to be a worthy IP. But after I actually played the original Darksiders, it was one of my earlier Hateful Truth videos from way back when, I really enjoyed the game. I thought that the game had interesting combat, the open world exploration, and the fact that as you unlock different abilities, you can find secret items and such throughout this world was great. Really enjoyed the boss battles, the story, and also the graphical design. I thought that the environments and such looked really well, and they were really well designed overall with the presentation. And so now, 2.5 years later, we get Darksiders 2, the direct sequel. And just to kind of elaborate a little bit on what this game is about and how it ties in as a sequel, I mean, obviously there'll be a minor spoiler here about the plot, so bear with it. Bear with me. Darksiders 1 was the story of how the Horsemen War. There are 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse, and the Horsemen War was somehow unleashed upon the Earth early. There was no call from the authorities saying that the world was going to end and the apocalypse should come, and war somehow was released and set upon the Earth, which caused the apocalypse, okay? Now, because this happened, there was a lot of confusion. It was almost like a mystery. What happened? Why was war set upon the Earth? And so over the course of the first game, that's the whole goal here. You actually get condemned by a council, who I guess are like the ruling body of the afterlife. I don't know. It's never really explained too well. But some council actually imprisons War and does an inquiry against him, saying, why did you do this? Did you do it of your own actions? And he, of course, pleads his innocence and says, I didn't do this. I was set loose, and and that's why it happened. I didn't just choose to go try to cause the apocalypse too early. And by the end of the game, you actually go through several different channels. It's still unclear by the end of the game what exactly happened. Why is it that war was unleashed upon the Earth early? And at the end of the game, basically the angels hunt down War, and they're trying to punish him for doing this because they know he fucked everything up. But at the end of the game, he's able to actually summon the other 3 horsemen to come to his aid, and that was kind of the cliffhanger ending of Darksiders 1. Darksiders 2 is kind of confusing when it comes to the plot, because the game starts out, you're the writer Death, okay? And so you're thinking, oh, this must take place, after Darksiders 1 when Death got summoned by War. But that's not where the game starts. The game actually starts during a period of time when War, it's said, is being imprisoned by the Council. And I guess it finally comes out later on, even though it's never really clear during the game. I actually had some viewers and fans explain this to me outside on my forums, that when War was being, had an inquiry by the Council, he was actually in prison for 100 years. And so during that 100 years, there's probably all these side things that were happening. Darksiders 2 is a game that takes place during that 100-year hiatus when the Earth no longer existed because all the humans have been, well, it exists, but all the humans have been killed because of the apocalypse, and Death is trying to find out what really happened. He's trying to prove War's innocence, okay? So, let's talk a little bit about it. Darksiders 1, when it came out in 2010, I really enjoyed it, but it did have its flaws. It had some game bugs, some puzzles that were just really difficult compared to the scale of the other puzzles of the game. The combat was kind of, I think it was flawed in certain ways, and so I gave the game a 7.5, okay? Darksiders 2, it actually seems to me that the game developers directly listened to a lot of the people's criticisms from Darksiders 1. Namely, for example, Fast travel. Fast travel is a major part of Darksiders 2 and is put in there since the very beginning of the game. While in Darksiders 1, you had to constantly be traveling back through gates and portals, and if you, oh, I got a new ability, so now I have to go find an item, and the item wasn't available till I got that ability, so now I have to backtrack to the first stage of the game again and run around and try to find this item that's going to allow me to advance to the next stage of the game. There's a lot of backtracking and a lot of time wasting, and it really did feel a little bit of annoyance that you had to do that. Darksiders 2 allows you to fast travel as soon as you find something on the world map. And let me tell you, in my opinion, it's a massive help, because never do you feel, as you're traveling throughout the world of Darksiders 2, that you're wasting your time, okay? So what is Darksiders 2 compared to Darksiders 1? It's very similar in scope. Basically, you're death, and you have melee combos that you can do. As you do more fighting in the game, you can unlock more special abilities and things that will add to the complexity of the melee combat that you'll be doing in Darksiders 2. You'll also eventually get a gun and some other abilities like a grappling hook, which is very similar to the equipment that actually War had in Darksiders 1, where you can pull yourself to ledges but also pull yourself towards enemies, etc. The way the game works is it's based off of currency and some other things. So as you fight enemies, obviously they're going to drop currency. And the currency allows you to buy or unlock better melee capabilities later on in the game. Also, the game has a loot system, which heavily changes the gameplay from Darksiders to Darksiders 2. In the Darksiders 2, it's a lot about the loot. You run around trying to get the best loot. There are entirely optional dungeons in the game that you have no obligation whatsoever to play, but if you do, you can find rare loot, okay? Now, the way it works is you've got a light weapon, that's for your light attack button. You've got a heavier weapon, that's for your heavy attack button, okay? And then you have all armor pieces of loot, like your boots, your shirt, your shoulder pads, or whatever you want to call it, and gloves. That's the kind of loot we're talking about. And basically, the loot will have different attributes. Some might have added ice damage. Some might have damage per second because it's a poisoned weapon or something like that. It's all the classic things that you see in role-playing games, but they're actually implemented here in Darksiders 2. So as you traverse the world, you're going to be going to different dungeons and doing different things. Now, I have to admit, the plot of this game is confusing as hell, and here's why. You never really understand what's going on or why you're doing it. Like, even at the end of the game, the whole goal of the game is to get this thing called the Well of Souls, because somehow the Well of Souls could possibly revive mankind, and then somehow that's going to prove War's innocence for causing the apocalypse. It's never really explained how or why. It's very unclear what Death is doing, why he's doing it. But what ends up happening is this one simple task of just going to the Well of Souls ends up becoming the most bloated and complicated one, because he has to travel to all these different worlds and unlock different items and abilities and get keys from different places to get to the well and open the door. It's really confusing. Overall, what's going on is that this thing called corruption is destroying the world. Not only one world, but all these different dimensions. So you've got the Forgelands, which is supposed to be some world where these mythical people actually built everything in the universe. You've got the Land of the Dead, which is kind of like where people go when they die. You've got the Angels world called Lost Light, which is kind of like heaven. You've got Hell, which is like, I think it's called like the demon world. And then you actually have Earth as well. Earth is one of the places that you go. And you're going to go there and do different things. You're going to go to different dungeons. And so, of course, there's going to be an ice-themed dungeon. There's going to be a fire-themed dungeon. There's going to be all the water theme. Every dungeon theme is kind of fleshed out in this game. And what it really amounts down to is you're going to run around these dungeons, go into a room similar to Zelda, try to figure out, gee, how do I get from point A to point B and get out of this room and continue on with the dungeon. There's going to be doors that are locked where you need to find keys to unlock the doors, and those will be in chests. And it's pretty, I mean, seriously, playing Zelda Skyward Sword back in December and playing this feel very similar. I think the primary difference is the combat, where in Zelda Skyward Sword it was all about just kind of, swinging your sword with the Wiimote and then using different mechanics like bombs and such to stun your enemies and kill them. In Darksiders 2, the combat is insanely simplistic. I mean, it's even more simplistic than the Skyward Sword combat. It's pretty much just do different combos against certain enemies. And yeah, there may be, out of all the enemies in the game, maybe there's 2 where you have to change up your strategy because they can block, and so you have to try to roll behind them or wait for them to attack and then counterattack them. But outside of those few enemies, the combat is really simplistic. So you're going to do like light, light, heavy, heavy, heavy. Oh, they're attacking. Let me dodge out of the way. Oh, I'll attack again. Light, light, heavy, heavy, heavy. Oh, they're attacking again. Let me dodge out of the way. And that's pretty much the combat of Darksiders 2. And I wish I could say that, okay, well, that's just the regular enemies that you fight. There's bigger and better enemies later on. But even the bosses in Darksiders 2 are extremely simplistic in this regard, where a lot of the bosses are just big guys that come at you, and all you need to do is lock onto them and dodge roll out of the way, hit them from behind, use whatever abilities you have. Like, there are buffs and things in the game and special attacks in the game that you can use, but they're really not even needed. I actually played the entire game of Darksiders 2 with only 2 abilities. One was a defensive boosting ability, so that I would take less damage when I was fighting, and the other was a damage boosting ability, so I would deal more damage when I was fighting. I didn't need to use any of the combat abilities of this game to beat it, and I really didn't have much, if any, trouble at all with any of the combat in the game. So that being said, I think the combat of this game is extremely simplistic and not very fun. It actually was kind of boring to just fight waves and waves of enemies with the same kind of thing, and I was never challenged to the point where I had to learn something else or use a different strategy. It always worked, okay? So the combat, in my opinion, is kind of a letdown. The other thing is that, like I said, with this loot system that's going on in the game, you will eventually find weapons that are called possessed weapons, which means it's a weapon that supposedly has a soul of something trapped inside of it. Now, these weapons are extremely rare. I actually only found, I think it was like 3 possessed heavy weapons throughout the course of the game, and maybe 5 possessed light weapons during the course of the game. And the reason that these weapons are different from other weapons is that they have unique stats, so you might have some unique combination of abilities, like I said, inferno damage or something while you're attacking. But also, you can upgrade them, and what this means is that all the loot that you've picked up over the course of the game that you don't want or you don't need, maybe it's weaker than what you have equipped or whatever, you can now actually combine with this possessed weapon, and the possessed weapon will level up to 5 levels. Every time it levels up, it actually gets stat bonuses. So at first you may find a possessed weapon that's not so good, but all of a sudden once you level it up to level 5, it's insanely powerful. And for me, as soon as I found my first possessed weapon, that was it. Like, the combat of the game for 90% of the game became insanely easy. I mean, we're talking bosses I was killing with like 5 to 10 hits because the possessed weapons were so fucking powerful. So I don't really understand what they were thinking when they decided to put in these weapons that make you completely overpowered, especially even just for a first playthrough. I was pretty overpowered in my playthrough of Darksiders 2 with my possessed weapons. And it was to the point where, like, the light weapon was the only reason I ever used it is because it was a lead-in to my possessed heavy weapon in a combo. So I'd do light, light, which would do little damage. Then I'd do heavy, 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 and it would be a 5-hit combo. And the last 3 hits would take insane chunks of life out of whatever I hit. And then later on in the game, I found more possessed weapons, which I was able to level up, and it just continued with this pattern. So not only is the combat extremely simplistic, but you end up finding weapons that make it insanely overpowered and easy. So I really don't know what on earth they were thinking when it came to the combat. Maybe they thought the combat of Darksiders 1 was too complicated. If you remember, in Darksiders 1, it was more about hitting continued combos on an enemy until you could execute them and kill them. In this game, you do have that mechanic. You can hit an enemy until a B prompt appears above their head. You can press it to do an execution, which grants you different bonuses. Maybe you'll gain more magical power. Maybe you'll gain more health back. But I almost never had to do it in the whole game. Like, I completely ignored the execution mechanic as well, because just the basic combat was so overpowered. So I don't know what they were thinking when they simplified it. It was really odd, okay? Where the game shines, in my opinion, is in the dungeon crawling, the platforming, and the graphical design. I think those 3 things were awesome. The graphics of Darksiders 2, just like the graphics of Darksiders 1, very impressive. It's a unique art and visual style, okay? And every world has its own flavor. The hell world looks like, you know, mythical hellfire and brimstone and demons, and everything is a gothic look to it. The Forge world, which is the world of the people who are like the builders, the makers who built all the worlds, is a beautiful fantasy land with green, lush, you know, forests and a beautiful water dungeon where it's all like rivers and stuff flowing through it. It's really a unique visual style, and I think it has a lot to do with, and forgive me because I have no idea how to pronounce his name, but the artistic director is Joe Madura. He's a comic book artist, and I know this because I used to draw comic books in the 90s that I used to buy, like the X-Men. And he's basically kind of like the creative genius behind the design of a lot of the monsters and a lot of the things in the game, and he's the artist who drew all the concept art. So I really like the fact that the enemies kind of really match the locations that they're at. Death has a really cool looking look, having like a skeletal mask over his face the whole game. And then, of course, like I said, the level design itself, beautiful. You will definitely enjoy the environments and just the visual appeal of this game. The dungeon crawling and platforming are completely on par with other similar games. The platforming reminds me a lot of like Assassin's Creed, Prince of Persia, where you've got wall running, you've got mechanics where you're going to be wall jumping back and forth. You'll use abilities to swing and climb and do different platforming elements that are really enjoyable. Some of the abilities from Darksiders 1 make a return, like the Void Walker, which creates portals and you can go through them. There are some new abilities, such as the Phase Walker, which allows you to go to in only one dungeon, though. That's the one bummer about it. But in one dungeon, you can go back in time to a past version of this dungeon, and you can see, oh wow, look, over time this bridge broke, and now you can cross it in the past and then go back to the future. So, really cool, interesting elements to the exploration and platforming. I definitely like that aspect the most. The puzzle solving as well. The puzzle solving is interesting, it's fun. A lot of the puzzles involving corruption. You need to bring light to the corruption to get the corruption to go away. A lot of the puzzles involving finding hidden items, swimming, using the portals to propel yourself to do stuff, hitting certain switches and climbing certain walls and doing certain things. Really fun, really entertaining. That's where the game shines, in my opinion. Now, that being said, I actually do feel that the puzzles of Darksiders 2 were significantly easier than some of the ones in Darksiders 1. There were times when I was playing Darksiders 1 that I was just sitting there scratching my head, and I said, what am I supposed to do here? I'm stuck. I'm not sure what the next step is. And I would sit there, and literally, I remember when I was playing Darksiders 1, there were times when I stopped the camera for like 20 minutes, and I sat there thinking, and then it would come to me, and then I would start recording, and I would solve the puzzle. This game, I never really came to that. Almost every puzzle on the fly I was able to solve almost instantaneously. There was maybe one or two that were a tad bit tricky, and I tried a couple things that didn't work, and then, boom, eureka, it came to me. So, the game, in my opinion, actually is significantly easier than Darksiders 1. And considering all the changes that they made to the game, I'm wondering if this was intentional, because, let's face it, all the changes made to Darksiders 2 from Darksiders 1 seem to streamline the game and make it almost like a more an easier experience, almost a more mainstream experience. You've got simplified combat, you've got fast travel so you don't have to backtrack throughout the maps, you've got puzzles that aren't really as challenging as the puzzles of the first game, you've got boss encounters that are pretty much all cut and paste and very easy. There's really not a lot of groundbreaking stuff here. In fact, I would actually say there's no groundbreaking stuff. The fact that, you know, Darksiders 1 combined the adult themes and the gore and melee combat of a game like God of War with the platforming and puzzle solving of games like Prince of Persia and Zelda, that is kind of now not original anymore because you've already done it. And so putting out a more streamlined game of just doing more of the same, it doesn't really blow me away. I really had a lot of fun playing Darksiders 2, and I think the reason is because this year, being completely honest with everyone, hasn't been a great year for games. A lot of the games that came out this year, unfortunately, seem to be a lot of letdowns and disappointments. Things that we thought had potential to be great and really weren't. And I was actually just recently looking at the games release list for 2011 and the things that I had played at 2011 up to this point in the year of last year versus what I've played this year. And it's just like, what the hell? So I think I had a lot of fun playing this game, but it might be because there's just nothing else better out there. That being said, value-wise, you will get a bang for your buck. The game's campaign itself, just if you were just to ignore all the optional content in the game and just do the story of the game, It's going to run you probably around 20 hours. Now there are several optional side dungeons. I think there's like 4 or 5 major ones that are completely optional. You never have to actually go inside of them, but if you do, there's more platforming, there's more puzzle solving, there's more loot, there are optional bosses that you can actually fight in the game as well. And that, from what I've heard, if you were to do all the optional things in the game, and all the optional dungeons, the optional bosses, looking for the optional items, trying to get all the collectibles, because they're all collectibles and things in the game that you can trade in for money or stat bonuses. If you were to do this Crucible, which is a multi-level challenge-like dungeon, and you were to do all of that, from what I've heard, the game could be actually up to 50 hours of content. So if you really enjoy the whole dungeon crawling aspect, you can get a lot of quantity out of this game. However, when it really comes down to it, it's an issue of quantity versus quality. And as I've said, with watered down combat, with puzzles that never really challenge you so much during the course of the game, with fast travel making it easier to get from point A to point B, it really seems like the game has been watered down. That's really what Darksiders 2 feels like. Watered down Darksiders 1. And then the biggest letdown for me in the entire game was when I got to the end of the game, and I'm not going to spoil, but let me just say this, because this is one major point that you need to know if you're going to play this game and have an investment of time. This game happens parallel to Darksiders 1, and when this game ends, you are right back to square one where you were when Darksiders 1 ended. So a lot of people didn't realize that. They thought this was going to be a sequel, it's going to continue the story of Darksiders 1. Absolutely not. It's a parallel installment next to Darksiders 1 that's going on, and so there's really no new plot that gets explained. Everything that happens in this game doesn't freaking matter at all, because in Darksiders 1, you're at the same point where at the end of the game, War unleashes the Horsemen come out, and that's apparently where we're going to be when we start Darksiders 3. Now when Darksiders 3 comes out, is that going to be a game about another Horseman, and how he had a fucking record-breaking chef's cooking career while war was, you know, being inquired by the council, and so we're going to have a cooking game with strife, you know what I mean? And then all of a sudden, oh, I got summoned by war, here we go, and the game will end where it's the same ending again. And it's kind of ridiculous, but it seems like almost that's what they're leaning towards. Not the cooking aspect that I was joking about, but the fact that it seems like they might have one game for every single horseman, and just to explain their abilities, explain where they're coming from, a little bit of their history, and then maybe they'll have like a Darksiders 5 where all 4 of the horsemen are finally in it and we have an advancement on the story. You can get away with it once. I don't know if they're going to be able to get away with it for 2 more games and 2 more horsemen, because I think people are eventually going to want advancement of the story. Right now I'm kind of mad. I played this game for 20 hours, I don't have a fucking clue of anything different from when Darksiders 1 ended, of what's going to happen with the story. That's kind of a cop-out. It makes this game feel like a filler game. A game that actually was meant to just fill space until they can write a better story to conclude the story. And that's really annoying. So, Darksiders 2. You probably will like it. Again, if you like a dungeon crawling kind of a deal, if you like platforming, if you're looking for an adult-themed kind of game outside of the more kiddie ones like Zelda, this is going to be right up your alley. Okay? If you're looking for a game that has a lot of quantity of content, not necessarily saying that it's all quality, but a lot of quantity, this is also your game. $60 for up to 50 hours of gameplay is a really far cry these days. A lot of these games come out there 4 or 5 hours long. This is the complete and utter polar opposite of that. However, I really do feel the game, honestly, is kind of almost a step back from Darksiders 1. Some things that were improved, I think, helped the game, such as fast travel, but other things like the more simplified combat, the overpowered weapon system, the easier puzzles, and the plot that goes absolutely nowhere is annoying as hell, and actually, I think, holds the game back. So there are some improvements, but there are some things that actually, I think, got worse from Darksiders 1. And so, in order to give the game a fair review, I really need to look at not only everything else that's out there right now and everything that came out this year, but I also need to look at enjoyment factor, and I also have to look at Darksiders 1 and the review that I gave that game. Back in 2010, I gave Darksiders 1 a 7.5, and I cited a lot of its faults, but I said that it had room for improvement, and I would love to see a Darksiders 2. Well, here we are 2.5 years later, Darksiders 2 is out, and I have to say I am a little disappointed with the changes that they made. I think they could have really taken the series in a different direction rather than having a pseudo-sequel that really isn't a sequel. It's kind of like a game parallel to Darksiders 1 with some things that are streamlined but actually making the game a little bit too easy. I'm going to give Darksiders 2 a 7.5. That's right. I don't think it's improved at all upon the first game. I really think that overall, some things got better and some things got worse, and they've negated themselves, and it pretty much brings it to about the same level as Darksiders 1 was. Again, if you like dungeon crawling, platforming, if you like this kind of post-apocalyptic story, you'll probably enjoy the game. If you want a lot of quantity out of your games, this is the game for you. But if you're looking for something that's really robust, unique, a fun continuation of the last game, you're really not even going to find it here. I really felt like this was a filler game by the time that I beat it. Almost like, oh, this is just another game to throw out there that they'll buy until we finally decide to continue the story. That's really annoying, and that's a shame. They could have done a better job, and I am a little bit disappointed with Darksiders 2, being completely honest. Alright, so that's it for the Hateful Truth video game review for Darksiders 2. I hope you've enjoyed it, you found it very informative, and I hope that you know that, like I said, these are my honest thoughts based off of my playthrough of the game with no kind of political, reasoning for me to say anything like this. I'm not getting paid off by any company, and that's why I feel that my reviews are unique and interesting, and why people want to know what my thoughts are on these games. So, I'm Darkside Phil, and I'll see you next time for another Hateful Truth video game review. Peace.